It's all communism and sex magic today. Okay, where are we? Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted episodes. Oh Lord,
49.
Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted episode 49. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden. Don't cut that bit out. That was very good.
Well, we've oft heard it said, is the Pope a Catholic? But the question today is the Pope a communist? Why are the BBC asking this question, Mark?
Well, quite simply because he's a bit of a communist.
Show us the article, Mark. Let's have a look.
To do that first. Oh, hang on a sec.
Yeah,
so,
let's have a look.
Well,
BBC
but it
had
goes,
a headline.
So this is an article from 2015, so it's not like a new thing. Where you've got Ed Staunton from the BBC asking, "Is the Pope a communist?"
Yeah.
So, like, my point really is that this goes right back to the beginning of the papacy. Like, since his election, he's been accused of promoting. Like, I think the important connection to make is this connection between Pope Francis and liberation theology. Would you agree, Gavin? Like, that's really where we're coming from with this.
Yes, I think so, and not just because it makes sense in terms of what he's doing, and what you've just shown, as you say, comes from 7 or 8 years ago. But the fact that he's just drawn round him in dialogue some Marxists is really, it's quite an odd thing to do. Of all the people he might want to have a cheerful dialogue with, why them? And as somebody said, if you're going to tell a beleaguered ideological group to keep on going and not give up, it wouldn't be Marxists. It ought to be traditional Catholics. So, and there was, I'm very sorry, I've forgotten who it was, but in the last 2 or 3 weeks, somebody has written, a fairly serious intellectual critic has written an article saying that either the Pope is losing it mentally, or he's stupid, or else he's a communist, because only those 3 explanations deal with the way he behaves. And he's not losing it mentally yet. He's certainly not stupid. So there's some scope for asking the question actually really quite seriously, more seriously maybe than Ed Staunton did.
I was wondering if Mark's eyebrow raised a little there when you said he's certainly not stupid. Is that your take, Mark?
Oh, do you know, I was funny. I was having this conversation with someone earlier on today, and like they were saying, he's not stupid, he's got a plan. And I know that's what Gavin sort of feels about it as well. But, like anyone who did the Fiducia Supplicans, like complete disaster, he doesn't strike me as that bright, really. Like, how could you not predict that James Martin wasn't going to immediately go to the New York Times and do gay marriages, basically? How could you not predict that everyone who wanted to do that would do it straight away? I mean, it was obvious, wasn't it?
The other side of the argument, Mark, is that they did predict it, and they wanted it, and it adds, it's outriders doing his work for him, slightly from. But essentially, if the intention is a form of Argentinian semi-Peronist confusion, it's working very well. I mean, if you were to say in the last 7 years, were his aim to be under the guise of chaos and confusion, to shift the whole of the Catholic Church several notches towards the progressive, political, therapeutic, and sexualized end, well, he's done it. So that was quite clever.
But you can't deny the fact that Fiducia Supplicans has been an utter train wreck. And that
we don't know yet.
Like, there must have been a better way of coming. Like they've basically completely cut off the church in Africa now. You've got everyone's got a different perspective. Like the thing with the book that we're talking about with Cardinal Fernandez, where they all knew about it. It's come out in the news this weekend that Pope Francis, like Cardinal Fernandez, has said that Pope Francis knew all about the book. And like us lot are going, well, of course he did. We know he did, because they tried to erase its existence. So he was obviously embarrassed about it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done that, would he?
I think
could we return to Fiducia Supplicans in a moment, and just because we began with communism, for anyone watching who may have stumbled across us or be interested in Christianity and just wanting to learn, can one of you explain why there's a conflict between communism and our Catholic faith? why is it a problem? And why are we sort of laughing to say the Pope might be a communist? And of course, he, as you said, he gathered this little group of Marxists and spoke explicitly about the evils of dictatorships, mentioning Nazism, but didn't, even though he might well have wanted to, talk about the evils of communism. It has, we know, been roundly criticised by the Church, and Pope John Paul II came out of communism and was able to give real clarity of understanding to the problems of it. But for those people watching who might be thinking, maybe young people, because, you know, when I was at school, a lot of young people were, you know, considered themselves kind of, well, I doubt communists, but they might have erred that way. Why is there this conflict, and why is it problematic? Mark, who's got his book out.
Well, this is the Catechism. Should we start there with the Catechism of the Catholic Church?
This is a moment, I think, to try and explain.
So basically, if you want to look this up, guys, and you can if you put in the Catechism of the Catholic Church into Google and then the paragraph number, you'll get this text, right? So 1883 says, socialization presents dangers. Excessive intervention by the state can threaten personal freedom and initiative. So really, this is what it's about, right? There's a conflict between what the church teaches is subsidiarity, which is the idea that everything, all the decisions are made at the lowest possible level, so that you have got responsibility for your actions. That's where it begins. And in the family, you have got responsibility for your family. So that's basically what the church teaches. The teaching of the church has elaborated the principle of subsidiarity, according to which a community of a higher order should not interfere in the internal life of a community of a lower order, depriving the latter of its functions, but rather should support it in case of need and help to coordinate in its activity with the activities of the rest of society, always with a view to the common good. And on collectivism, which is also all forms, if you don't know, Marxism, socialism are all forms of collectivism, and Nazism and, you know, social communism and all that. The principle of subsidiarity is opposed to all forms of collectivism. It sets limits for state intervention. It aims at harmonizing the relationships between individuals and societies. It tends towards the establishment of true international order. So that's what the church teaches about it.
Can I add to that? It contradicts Christianity at every important level in three ways in particular. The first is it has an entirely different view of human nature. It thinks human nature is perfectible, and it sets out to perfect it politically. Christianity teaches human nature is not perfectible. We have to be saved and then changed. Then it's wrong about human nature because it deals with people not in terms of their individual merits and responsibilities, but as Mark was saying, as part of a collective, and defines people by their collective identity, as cultural Marxism does too. And thirdly, its operation is totalitarian power, and the church believes that the use of totalitarian power is utterly anti-human. God instead uses love. So for those three reasons, at the essential points where your philosophy of life is constructed, it's the exact opposite of Christianity. And then if you add a fourth reason, which is that every single time it gets any power at all, the first thing it does is to make a beeline for the church to destroy it and to destroy the family. So the idea, given particularly the last 100 years, and especially the Spanish Civil War and what that's taught us, that there is any common cause that can be made with our greatest political and ideological enemy is absolutely nuts. And Rod Dreher said this. Rod Dreher said, look, communism has killed over 100 million people in the last 100 years, many of them Christians, many of them priests and nuns. Why on earth would a leader of the Catholic Church want to have a joint negotiation with our most pernicious enemy?
Yeah.
So perhaps we could explain that, should we, at this point, that we haven't actually said what it is we're actually talking about, have we? Which is this story. Here it is on Vatican News, which the Pope encourages Marxists and Christians to fight corruption and uphold the rule of law. So Pope Francis meets with representatives of this transversal dialogue project. And I was just telling the guys earlier on that someone on Twitter said to me, what do you expect him to do if he's got to meet with this group of Marxists? He's not going to tell them that they've, killed more people, committed worse genocide than anyone else in history. And my response was, well, perhaps he should. That might be a good start. And the second thing was that he actually started this group. This is a group that he started. So we go back again to this history. We go back to what I was saying at the beginning, which is that from his election, he's been accused of promoting liberation theology, which is a theological movement that emerged in the 1970s and was particular really to Latin America. And the aim of the movement was addressing the concerns of the poor and oppressed. Now it's ringing bells, isn't it? Because that's another one of Pope Francis's sort of main leitmotifs of his papacy. It's characterized by a special concern for the poor and for a commitment to justice. It's therefore easy to draw a parallel, I think, with the Franciscan papacy. But the movement presents a diversity of theological positions, and its doctrinal frontiers are really poorly defined. And it's been, as a result of that, it's been criticised for its use of concepts borrowed from various currents of Marxist thought. Some theologians and exegetes associated with liberation theology have conducted an analysis inspired by materialistic doctrines, including Marxist principles of the class struggle. And you can see the Pope's thought and motivation, and his criticism of market economies is very close. Like, these are the things that have caused people like Ed Staunton in the BBC article that we just showed to ask, is he a communist? Because it's like his economic thought, and which is basically, there's that old thing. Someone wrote a book about him saying he was the political pope, and you can see that coming across in a lot of this ideology. But basically, consistently, he's been sort of promoting Marxist ideas all the way through the last 10 years of his papacy. And you saw it especially in, what was the one about the climate that he did? Blimey, it slipped my memory. The encyclical, or the one I mean, though. God, it was awful. It was like 4 hours of my life I'll never get back again.
The most recent one?
No. What was it one? Laudato Si, the one on climate change.
Laudato Si. Yeah. It's this, the danger of it is, and I think C.S. Lewis, and Gavin as the expert can correct me if I go wrong, but C.S. Lewis addresses this very problem of collectivism versus individualism in Mere Christianity, I think it is, and warns, as he often does, against the dangers of any extremes. And one of the great concerns of communism is, and people have often said this, it's something Peterson talks about as well, is that something might be good in theory, or at least you might see the value of it in theory, but it never translates in practice, and it imposes an unjust equality on people. You think, isn't equality a good thing? But it imposes an unjust equality, where something like Nazism imposed an unjust inequality. In Nazism, we were, it was the Jews are lesser, they're Utremensch, and then in communism, it doesn't matter your individual differences.
Because Marx was inspired by Hegel, wasn't he? And you've got the Hegelian dialectic, which is something we've linked to Francis as well before. So I understand what you're saying, Catherine, but isn't it the same thing in Marxism, where it sets up the bourgeoisie and the proletariat? So you've got that same Hegelian dialectic. Like, what it starts by doing is dividing us into, you have to hate these people because they're not the same group as you.
Well, that's the thing. It's the division, whether it's the division, and actually, in order to have that equalizing, that leveling, you have to prevent natural, like you were talking about natural law. It necessarily interferes with natural law and suppresses the natural. And in order to actually really impose that, it ends in the lives of, ends in the destruction of human life. So
they always turn to power to enforce what they can't get any other way. But Catherine's point about it being unjust equality hit the nail on the head. You can't produce equality that they want. They ought to produce equality of opportunity. That's a very good idea. But instead, it's a matter of equality of outcome, which can't be done. And as Peterson always says, the attempt to produce equality of outcome involves destroying people, taking away their liberty, and killing them. But the thing is, anyone who's got any sense of 20th century history knows very well that Marxism is wholly antithetic to Christianity. What it sets out to do is not believing in a God and not believing in heaven. It sets out to create heaven on earth. And it does what it does instead is to make dystopias. And I grew up reading the Gulag Archipelago, and you couldn't have had a clearer dystopia than that. And so, and one of the first things I did on conversion was I got hold of a book. It was actually Roger Guraudi. I remember his name now, from 1975. Wrote a book about the convergence of, just as the Pope appears to be doing now, between communism and Christianity. And I flirted with it for 3 or 4 months, thinking, I really hope this works, because this is really cool. I will look so cool if I'm a communist Christian. And it looked, I'm afraid I was more worried about looking cool than I was about world peace. But there we are. I was only late out of adolescence.
But this is the point. Is you said anyone who's got a sense of do go back, that anyone who's got a sense of 20th century history, and a lot of people simply won't, because our history, our education system is terrible. Our sense of history is awful, and therefore it's easy. You just talked about when you were young, you thought it was cool. That still is pervasive. That idea that this association with these ideologies is somehow cool. And I think what Pope Francis is doing, which is unhelpful, is he is pandering to that. He is giving that impression that yes, there is some cool association, and that's really young people really buy into that. And I think, I don't want to go as far as to say there's a cynical attempt to do that, but that is the result of what will happen. Sorry, Gavin, carry on.
Well, I've just in my mind's eye, I've got a meeting room with Pope John Paul II come back from the dead, a bit like Elijah and Moses on the Mount of Transfiguration, saying to Francis, "How stupid are you? You must know." I mean, the fact that we have John Paul II.
You think you're stupid.
It didn't take long, did it?
Well, I was speaking rhetorically. I think perhaps I'd say
it's always a good get out.
You see, I don't want to be rude to the Pope. It's so embarrassing. But if he's not stupid, then it must be bad faith or sub-Christian. And so we're back to this article. This article actually posited the idea that Pope Francis was a Marxist sleeper who'd got into the church in order to destroy it. Because look, they said, he appears to have Marxist predispositions, and he's destroying the church. You could hardly be a more destructive pope than he's been in terms of destroying the equilibrium and the coherence of Catholic Church and Catholic teaching. I mean, and looking back now, the first time I came across his changing the death penalty, I thought, that's a hostage to fortune. That's a mistake. But on that very platform, overturning the whole of the magisterium about whether or not the state has a right to impose a death penalty in certain circumstances, whether you like it or not, whether it's ideal or not, the if you like, the cosmic justice of it was the issue. He overturned that unilaterally. Well, the moment you allow a pope to do that, and nobody stopped him doing it or exposed it for being utterly inimical to the magisterium, you can change anything, and that's what he's doing. So he's either doing it, he's clearly doing it on purpose, and therefore he can't. I'm so sorry. I can't believe I'm saying this, but he can't be a Catholic.
Well, this is what I think we discussed, and I said back in 30-something, exactly that point, that I think that on the death penalty, to watch out, because it's not to do with sex, it's not as glamorous, it's not as hot button, and I think it was overlooked. But we all discussed that and said, look what's happening.
We saw
it, and please do go back, revisit old episodes.
No, we mentioned it. Yes,
this is almost this Trojan horse to get through this to move to things in the sexual arena, as we've just seen now with Fiducia Supplicans, which we can revisit. But I'll say again, and this is perhaps for new listeners and new viewers who haven't watched us all through, because I'll be repeating myself for those that have. I've said it many times, but if you haven't yet, it's well worth reading Pope Benedict XVI's Jesus of Nazareth, and especially I think it's so pertinent at the moment. There's a chapter on the temptations of Christ, and he deals with this very problem where people will be tempted to say, well, if you really are a saviour, isn't the first thing you do provide bread for everyone and make sure that there was no poverty and no hunger, and that desire to be really nice and compassionate is exactly that. It's a temptation, but it's a temptation that is it's false, it's wrong-headed, it's not the way we should be looking at it. But that's brilliantly espoused in Pope Benedict's Jesus of Nazareth.
I think is it worth saying as well that, like, we understand that for young people why communism is attractive, because if you're in a position about, you know, when you're a young person and you haven't really you like, without being patronising, but you know, you might not understand your place in the world, or, you know, it's tempting to think that there's this you know, perfect idea of on heaven on earth where everyone is equal and everyone gets the same amount of money and all this sort of thing, and you can be equal with all the people. And as you get older, perhaps you get a bit more cynical, but you start to realise, you know, as you get older, you tend to get more sort of conservative and see that it's just a lie, that is just a lie. And every time it's been tried, every time it's been attempted, it has failed miserably and resulted in the death of millions and millions of people.
But it's not cynicism. And I think probably we ought to try and be as philosophically coherent as we can.
Yeah.
In my mind, the map I have of this goes back to Rousseau and the French Revolution. So just you know, after the Renaissance and after the Enlightenment, just as civilization was developing some muscle, what it could or couldn't do, given that one of the constant sins of humanity is hubris. We think more of ourselves than we deserve. A philosophical idea came about that human beings could be made better by education and better conditions. And the whole of leftist politics has pursued that since Rousseau, and it was the platform upon which the French Revolution and the Communist Revolution were both built. But then if you look and see what actually happened, either from both revolutions, you see disaster and an enormous death toll. And so you're entitled to ask whether or not Rousseau's idea that human beings are not flawed but are perfectible is true. And it's the facts say it's nonsense. Then you look at Auschwitz and the Holocaust and the Jewish Christian narrative that human beings have got this extraordinary potential but this very profound flaw. And then ask the question, how is that flaw to be dealt with? And the answer is that everyone who's encountered Jesus appears to have it dealt with well. And so here we have these two models. One works, one doesn't work. It's not about being cynical. It's about being clear-sighted about human nature and the philosophy of human nature that we should adopt. And that's why we're entitled to be really very muscular about resisting leftish anthropologies based on this idea that you just need resources and education, which politicians say every single day on the radio to make things better. It isn't true, and we know it's not true.
Yeah, we absolutely need an understanding of original sin. Without an understanding of original sin, without the right anthropology, understanding of the human person, it's always going to go awry. And as you've just said, sorry, Mark.
Well, we had Ed Pfizer, didn't we? Brilliantly tweeted. You know, he said that there was like 10 of the last popes all spoke out against communism, and he gave brilliant quotes. You know, I mean, I can go through a couple of them. The unspeakable doctrine of communism, as it is called, is a doctrine most opposed to the very natural law, Pius IX, qui pluribus. There is nothing in common between social Christian and Christian democracy. They differ from each other as much as the sect of socialism differs from the profession of Christianity, Leo XIII. I mean, there's loads of stuff out there that very clearly you've got the Magisterium, right? So I think that's this is a growing question now. And so I was talking to Janet Smith, Professor Janet Smith, about this. And I've been speaking to lots of people about this, like to try and gauge what the position is on the Magisterium as we go, And
I love that. In the Catholic world, saying, I was just chatting to Janet Smith, is like someone in the secular world saying, I just rang Beyonce the other day.
Well, and she is brilliant, she's absolutely brilliant. And she was, so she was saying, so she said, I really want to talk to you about this. She said, she said it's a complex position. And a difficult one under Pope Francis, because there are historically, and I've got Comment Check open on so I don't know if readers are familiar with this, but like these are some really heavyweight Catholic books. But this is the New Dictionary of Philosophy. And one of the things that Communism says on the Magisterium is that throughout history there have been times when the Magisterium has said things and that's been wrong. So there are degrees of absolutism, if you like, when we talk about the Magisterium. With Pope Francis's pronouncements, we've also got a situation where some of those might, it's very likely the way that like Fiducia Supplicans has been, because the Magisterium is meant to be the Pope with the bishops, yeah? So if he wrote something, at Christmas about the incarnation and everyone would be behind him, wouldn't be a problem. That would be magisterial, And it depends how in sync it is with scripture and tradition and stuff like that. So you've got all these sort of personal opinions that he's throwing out. There's a really good question: how magisterial are they? And a professor called Rist has just written a book. It's hot off the presses, but I've ordered a copy, so I should have that by the next episode, and should be firmly through it. So Janet basically said, let's both read this book, and then we'll get together and we'll have a good old discussion about how the Magisterium works with this. So I feel very fortunate to be able to have access to, someone as erudite as Professor Janet Smith, and we can hopefully then we can come to our audience and we'll have some good answers.
Yeah, very good.
So
well, it would be well worth. Go on, Gavin. Sorry, you paused on my screen.
Well,
so I didn't.
Well, I waved because I wanted to jump in at this point after what Mark had said. So as a relatively new Catholic, I think one of the things that I've been most concerned about is exactly the question of the legitimacy of the Magisterium and how it works. And I was helped the other day by Joseph Shaw, the chairman of the Latin Mass Society, who's also a professor of philosophy at Oxford. And one of the things Joseph said was he articulated very clearly something I'm just beginning to get my head round, which is that the part of the problem that we have is not just Francis, but really the last 100 years since Vatican I. So the suggestion is that Vatican I created a certain amount of papal overreach for some very good philosophical questions, but nonetheless, it went too far. And because it went too far, it's left us with an impossible to resolve conundrum, because having invested so much in the relationship between the holder of the papal office and the magisterium, if the Pope gets it wrong, there's no way to row back. But on the other hand, if we dial it down a bit and we say, as Mark began to say, that the magisterium really only, if you like, reaches high octane when the Pope and the bishops together are saying coherent things. Not only are they saying it together, but they're saying it in complete ideological sync with everything in the past. That's magisterium. And what that means is that Pope Francis by himself, without the bishops, producing Amoris Laetitia and FS, is not magisterium. But the problem is that because we've become so papalized, so ultramontane, if you like, there isn't anything within the last 100 years of Catholic ecclesiology to allow us to refer to it, like a communication cord. Stop the train, it's gone down the wrong points. We need to back up and go to where the points are. We need to back up 100 years in the way in which we understand the Pope's relationship to his teaching authority. And until we can do that, one second, until we can do that, we're stuck. So I think Janet's absolutely right. That's the ecclesial task, the immediate ecclesial task, in order to allow us to get Pope Francis's heterodoxy off the back of the church and not to allow it to present it as magisterium.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how the church deals with this coming out of it. And, I've sort of try and keep up with what other people are saying, from other churches or ecclesial communities. And like a lot of people are saying, oh, this is de facto schism and all that sort of thing. And I love the fact, Gavin, that you've alluded very strongly to the fact that a lot depends on what happens at the next conclave in terms of if we get an Orthodox Pope. And let's not remember that the absolute, maybe the Lord, this is what the Lord is bringing out now, because over the last 10 years, we can point to all the villains, they've all been exposed. We've looked at my friend Anna. You both know Anna, and she's doing the Maryvale degree at the moment. She's doing fundamental moral theology at the moment, and she's writing an essay on Veritatis Splendor. And you've got all of these things. She said when Fiducia Supplicans come out, she went, this is all the stuff that's been condemned by the church. It's all right there in front of you. You know, if you've studied it, you can see it's all gradualism, you know, fundamental option, all these things now are being made clear. And there's a sort of feeling in me that this is the last turn of the, you know, that Bernard Haring sort of Charles Curran, all these theologies. And like we've been doing a bit of talking backwards and forwards on the essay that she's doing today. And she was reading one of Bernard Haring's essays. And she said, it's extraordinary how the hubris involved in that sort of theological position where you basically have to, I mean, something we should mention, I think, is the second reading today. Like, that's the first time in, 4 years that reading will have been read, 1 Corinthians 6, and it was extraordinarily powerful on the back of Fiducia Supplicans because it's...
Yeah. Well, also, the liturgist cut bits out. Did you notice? They cut it, they cut the stronger bits out of... Yes, I sat there thinking, wait a moment, you're doing this ghastly Vatican II-ish, take out any bits that might offend or challenge people and present it in this watered down way. I know it's another point. Sorry, Mark, go back to what you said.
Well, no, but that is exactly the point. And you know, to me, it's like it's so weird that and so providential that is the reading this Sunday, you know, that, you know, Tucho and Pope Francis and everything will have had to have read. It makes you wonder. I'll go back to this point. I think I've been saying it on my own channel, but I don't think I've been saying it here, is that, like, to me, there's very clearly two sort of strands of people involved in Christianity. One strand is carefully listening to scripture, you know, listening to the revelation, to divine revelation, listening to God's word, and searching your heart, feeling convicted by the Holy Spirit, trying to change your life, you know, trying to work with the gospel message to be a better person and to build a better society. And the other side are these weirdos who just seem to want to, you know, they like ignore everything that the gospel says and change it into some sort of meaningless affirmation of what they want to do. And all it does is it's like the complete opposite of the gospel, which says, you know, we're broken and Christ has the medicine to heal us. And these people are saying there's nothing you can do about your wounds. You just have to live with them and affirm that they are your reality.
But the problem is that that appeals to people who are looking to have their lives validated as they are. So if all the church offers is a way of validating you as you are, it offers nothing that isn't outside the church anyway. So I don't understand this desperate attempt to align with the spirit of the world, the spirit of the age, because it doesn't bring anything. So in a sense, it just, you know, we talked about how the synod ultimately will let people down. In a way, it's worse than not going through the loops and pretending that you are able to assimilate, because it can't. It's not even a question of should I, shouldn't I? It can't, in that sense. So yeah, I think it doesn't offer anything. Gavin, go ahead.
Well, more and more I begin to think that it's the spirit of Judas. I mean, so in the 12 people that Jesus chose, 8.5% of them took exactly the view that Mark describes, because first of all, Judas was very concerned about selling stuff for the poor, in inverted commas, though one of the apostles suggested he was on the take. But nonetheless, he was presenting his objections as though they were about social distribution and justice. And then when Jesus didn't do what he wanted him to do, he betrayed him, because Judas came along for the ride, but secretly harbored an entirely different outlook. So we have a lot of people in the church who come along for the ride, want it as a form of therapy, insist on trying to turn the teaching into their own terms. And I have to say that I've been one of those people. I mean, I spent a while in my Jungian pro-gay stage, and it's all about your hierarchy of values. If you have a top value that's different from the gospel, then rather than leave the church and say, I'm going to be a humanist or a Quaker or something, the temptation is to stay within the church and try and get it to do what you want it to do without actually being honest about it. And part of the problem with Tucho Fernandez is he's quite clearly some kind of, I was going to say sex addict. That's not quite right. What? He's quite clearly preoccupied with sex, and he wants the rest of the church to be as well. And so I'm not sure at what point we're going to move on to the sex magic stuff. But
well, I think we probably should now, because we're running very short of time. We spent quite some time. So let's just very briefly finish with, Gavin, you might like to highlight your article that you've written.
So if you take the quotes from the book that he had suppressed, then he sounds, John Zmirak has written a marvelous article saying, here are 4 quotes, 3 of them from occultists and sex magicians, and 1 is from the prefect for the CDF. See if you can work out which is which, because they all say the same thing. And so both my article and as John has expanded it suggests that Fernandez presuppositions are sub-Christian, anti-Catholic, and there's a preoccupation with sex. And his thesis that the orgasmic intimacy automatically produces an experience of the divine. Well, one of the things I do in my article is to trace this back to the alchemists and the Renaissance, when you had a lot of over-enthusiastic people hoping or saying this thing. But it's only the divine if you have a different attitude to God. The problem is that this is clearly Fernandez's private view of the universe, but you can trace this ideological commitment right through to Amoris Laetitia and Fiducia Supplicans, because what he's trying to do is to change the church's evaluation of sexual intimacy and outside marriage, not just inside marriage, starting off with marriage, but essentially outside marriage, which is where it spills over into the whole gay issue. And effectively, John Zmirak says rather more overtly than I do that Cardinal Fernandez is in the same ballpark as the sex magicians, and that's why those 2 documents are so problematic and are not part of the Magisterium. A few people have written on my YouTube page, "You no idea what you're talking about. How dare you smear these people? You're a nasty man." To which my answer is, if you can show me what's wrong with the argument, I'm very happy to revisit it. But just calling me names isn't actually going to take us very far. But I'm really quite, as it happens, I know a little bit about alchemy and esotericism and the Renaissance. And that's partly why I wrote the article, because I was struck, as John was also, immediately by the similarities. So what we have is we have a pope who's appointed as his head theologian, somebody whose presuppositions are actually sub-Catholic, sub-Christian, perhaps anti-Catholic and anti-Christian, and trying to drag the church along with it. And there are so many people who are secularized and see some advantage to it for themselves that they're willing to go along with it, which is why we're in a form of de facto theological schism.
Yeah. Good.
Well, John Zmirak is all very well, but the fact that Professor Larry Chapp, who is someone I really do admire, I admire John Zmirak, but Larry Chapp is someone who I really do pay attention to, actually quoted your article as the best thing that had been written on it. I thought that really did give some powder to your gun there, Dr. Essendon, I have to say. It was a great article, but to have someone like that pick it up, who's no mean intellect, and say this was the best thing he'd seen written on it, gives some weight to your argument, whatever the idiots on your YouTube channel were saying. Not that
well, now come on. Hello,
I'm very
idiots
pleased to
and
say
non-idiots alike.
Someone as ignorant as me is able to remain humble.
Please
I have
like
no idea how important Larry Chapp is. So
yeah. Oh, do please like and subscribe and share, even the idiots. You're in good company much of the time.
But this is a direct contrast to the paths to holiness, isn't it? This is where really the answer to all this problem is in the threefold path to holiness. The purgative, the unitive, and the illuminative stages. That's how we grow into holiness, and it's the call throughout the gospel. Is a call to holiness, that you should be holy for every single person, and it's in direct contrast to this weird theology that is, it's like they don't even understand it,
No,
and
which is why I think it's worth highlighting those things that it would be better to turn to rather than
quite right,
Fiducia Supplicans, which we talked about last episode. And some people are saying, well, so you're just annoyed because he used the word orgasm. Pope John Paul II used the word orgasm. It's not that. It isn't that. If you read fiducia supplicans against something like In Defense of Purity by Dietrich von Hildebrand, which was part of the grounding for Pope John Paul II's love and responsibility, and his later Theology of the Body talks. That's a different. Somebody likened it to something like a cartoon versus a Caravaggio. You know, they're not on the same plane. So it's not a puritanical objection to using a word like orgasm. It's about, as you say, it's as Gavin's pointed out in his fantastic article, we've already said and we'll link here, is actually it's these different. It's a different grounding. The whole grounding is problematic, and it is something that you're able to, I think, Gavin, and have shown to be so. Yeah.
And then there's the whole Rupnik link as well, isn't there? Which is really, I thought, very, very interesting. So where you've got Rupnik, who's not been removed, you know, not had any of his privileges removed, despite the fact that he's been involved in, what would we call it? Like abuse, in a ritualistic abuse, in like, you know, integrating religious elements, or, I mean, it is absolutely bizarre. But there's a real connection. Don't read Tucho's newly revealed book, people. Don't bother yourselves with it, right?
Or if you have already and you plan to, read it in conjunction with something like Theology in the Body, Love and Responsibility, In Defense of Purity, on chastity, all of these things.
It's just nothing good in it. But like, it is like an abuser. That's how it's like grooming. It's like a handbook on grooming. That's what it reads like to me.
If you go back, Catherine, sorry.
No,
go back briefly to the headline. The Pope encourages communists to fight corruption and abide by the rule of law. And then you ask, to what extent has the Pope done those things in his own church? There has been no real dealing with corruption, the sexual corruption, the child abuse. I mean, Rupnik and McCarrick together are the examples of his unwillingness to deal with the corruption. And then in terms of the rule of law, he doesn't impose the rule of law on Rupnik and McCarrick, but he abuses the law to close down traditionalist communities, fire bishops who criticize him. So, I mean, he simply doesn't have a moral platform to tell other people to fight corruption and follow the rule of law, when that's really the last thing that's happened within the Catholic Church itself. I mean, lamentably and horribly so.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, sadly, as you said earlier, Gavin, I think it's a really horrible position to be in as Catholics, because we don't want to be sitting here saying, well, we've got Hobson's choice. Either we conclude the Pope is stupid or has bad will, or is, none of them are good options. So
I'd just like to go back to the readings in liturgy this morning. I was very helped by one of my favorite readings from the Old Testament, Samuel and Eli.
Yeah.
And right at the end of it, so Eli, the establishment is corrupt. And the Lord comes and says to Samuel, I'm going to deal with this corruption. You can tell them that, the days are numbered. And Samuel doesn't want to tell Eli this, of course, because it's Eli's sons, and he hasn't done what he ought to have done. Eli has this very moving phrase: "Don't be afraid of telling me the truth. It's the Lord speaking, and we're just going to have to listen to it and go with it." And therefore, I'd like to suggest that if it sounds as though we're being unnecessarily anti-Francis, or we're disrespecting the office of the Pope, that isn't the intention at all. The intention, in fact, is to defend the office of the Pope by showing how badly the incumbent is abusing the office. And the prophetic literature all the way through says that God wants the truth told. Now, how we tell it matters. We need to tell it with a degree of humility and awareness of our own flaws. And I hope all I can say is I hope we try and do that. But we are entitled to exercise the responsibility of telling the truth in the name of Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life. And the reason we can do it without too much anxiety is because he invites us all to repent. So if we look at our own flaws, we go to confession, we say, Lord, I'm sorry. Lord, have Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner. Then we do have a platform in which we can try in the best spirit possible to tell the truth. But the truth has to be told. Eli knew that.
Yeah. That's a really excellent point to finish. Thank you, Gavin. And I agree with what you said earlier, Mark. I think there's there's a frustration, but there's an element in which you can see that the Lord is bringing it all out. Like you said, we can see all the filth. It's like the scum rising to the top and being brought out. And however it's done, it might be being done in ways that we find really odd and surprising. But nevertheless, it's being done. So that's something we just must continue to pray. As you've said, may continue to pray, fast and hope, and never give up on the church and the bride of Christ, and also to turn to those things that remain and will always remain true, good and beautiful. So we'll be back with you very soon. But for now, I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashenden, and to borrow the ending of another excellent podcast, pray for the church.
Did you want to add anything else? I just finished without checking if you were ready to finish.
Brilliant. All good.
Are you happy
Brilliant.
to finish
Well
there,
done.
Mark?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry,
no.
yeah. Right.
Very good.
Perhaps cut out the bit